Okay, so have you heard of the 4% rule? Especially if you've been part of that FIRE movement, that financially independent, retire early movement they talk about. They always talk about that 4% rule, right? You can live on 4%. But is that rule actually accurate? Is it even working, or is it a complete lie? That's what I'm discussing in this video right now. Okay, so let's talk about this 4% rule. We've heard it for years. Heck, I heard it almost 25 years ago when I first became a financial advisor. They'd say, hey, listen, if you save $1 million in your retirement accounts, you can live on 4% a year or $40,000 a year. However, as I got more and more into the financial advising, even we questioned it. In the early 2000s, we even questioned, is that 4% a little too rich? Well, here's why, guys. Did you know where the 4% rule came from? First and foremost, one, myth. It's actually not a rule. It never has been a rule. It was actually based on these Monte Carlo simulations. Basically, they did simulations of the market. If you had money in the market or money in those accounts from 1926 to 1976, he went and did all these models saying if you pulled out X percent, at what point did you have enough money to live for a couple decades? Now remember this, 1976, our average life expectancy was only into like the 70s, really like the early to mid 70s. That was it. So most people would work until they're maybe 62, 65 years old, and they would have, on average, maybe 10 years of retirement. So he did all the calculations, said, you know what, you should be okay with 4%. Now, the problem is, that was up through 1976. But now, 50 frickin' years later, people are saying, oh yeah, 4% rule, that's what it is. I can do it. And I'm 30 years old and I made it. I'm financially independent. No, you're not. This is why I got booted out of the FIRE Facebook group, because I said, hey guys, that number is actually inaccurate. They said, we don't like you. We hate you. So boom, get out of here. And by the way, mutual funds rock. I'm like, no, they don't. They suck. I know, because I used to have them. But I got financially independent by getting away from mutual funds and doing real estate investing, right? But again, I'm going to leave that for another time. So going back to this 4% rule, even as financial advisors, even when we wanted it to be true, we still question it. We said, well, does it work today? Because one, we're living longer, but two, guess what happened after 1974, at the tail end of when he was doing this? We were taken off the gold standard. President Nixon had us taken off the gold standard that was backing up our US dollar. That's at that point, our dollar was just literally a piece of paper. It was like a note. It was like debt that was quote unquote, backing it up, right? Well, that created massive inflation even after the 1970s and much higher inflation ever since. So here's the thing, we got two headwinds. We've got people living longer and we got higher inflation. Now when they do these numbers, that number is 3%, not 4, 3%, and that's if you're retiring in your 60s. So if you're going to full retirement age, you can live on 3% a year. So even when I was a financial advisor, when I learned this, my whole goal was, I thought, well man, that's the case. If I can just be cheap enough, save up enough money in my mutual funds, if I get up to $2 million, I can live on $5,000 a month or $60,000 a year. And I was so thrilled about that, because back then, in the early 2000s, $5,000 a month was like living on $10,000 or $12,000 a month today. So I was thinking that would be the perfect, very comfortable lifestyle. Man, would I have been wrong, right? Let's be honest, $5,000 a month is not bad, but it's not great either. I mean, that's lower middle class at this point. Now, I know there's always somebody who's going to see this video probably like a year from now. They're going to troll on it because they got nothing better to do with their time. They're going to say, oh, I can live on $5,000 a month. That's great. You guys are spoiled. I can't believe it. It's like, well, first, you live in Mississippi. Anybody can live like a king on $5,000 a month. Secondly, you might be single. You probably lost all your relationships because you're probably a troll to them too, right? Third, of course, here's the bigger issue, is that everybody has different scenarios. Everybody has different situations. Some people live in California versus living in Mississippi or New Orleans, right? Some people actually have families. Some people are married. Some people are single. I get it. Some of you can live on $2,000, $3,000 a month, and that's awesome, all right? But understand that I had a growing family. I wanted to do it in my 40s. Living on $5,000 a month would never have been enough even till today. And so just so you know, by the time I got into my 40s, $5,000 a month, I couldn't even hardly live on that. And I was on a very strict budget. I was digging out of a debt hole because, just so you know, I was able to be financially independent twice. I got financially independent in 2006, was able to retire, came out of retirement to teach people a bunch of stuff. My real estate tanked, the business was tanked because we were focused on real estate investors. So I lost about everything, didn't go bankrupt, but I went over $1 million in debt, had to dig out of that $1 million debt hole, and then build up my passive income again to do it the second time, getting over $10,000 a month by 2016. That's what I did in the very, very short version of what happened, right? So I was able to do it twice. I know what it's like, okay? And $10,000 a month was still living on a pretty good budget, having 8 children in a blended family. So I get it, everybody's situation is different. So understand this, is that, again, you cannot live on 4%. That does not work. There's even guys like Dave Ramsey saying you should be able to pull off 8%. Did you know Dave Ramsey's co-host, George Kamel, actually supported the 3% back in 2023? He brought up on a radio show, a caller called in, asked Dave Ramsey about it. Dave Ramsey got pissed. And then Dave Ramsey got George to recant on it. And Dave was like, no, you should be able to live on 8% because you make 12% in the market, which, by the way, one, you don't make 12% in the stock market. Two, also 8%, when I ran the numbers, even based on the market averages, guess what? In about 15 or so years, you run out of money, depending on what the market does. So you're out of money. So you have to hope that when you die because you just live on macaroni and cheese, I won't say ramen noodles because, our cameraman loves ramen noodles, but, macaroni and cheese, like you're just living on mac and cheese, hoping to make it, or even on potatoes because those are dang cheap. You can live on those things for 5,000 years. You'll just die too quickly, right? So it's not about that. It's about how do we actually make sure you have a more than enough lifestyle, comfortable lifestyle. So understand this, it's 3% if you're trying to retire in your 60s. But if you want to do it younger, if you're trying to become FIRE like I did, and you're putting your money in mutual funds, then it's no longer 3%, it's 2%. I had this conversation with a friend of mine. He's 30 years old, has a successful marketing business. He's been saving and saving and saving, packing money away with a young family and everything. And he was saying like, Chris, I'm actually financially independent myself. I said, really? That's great. Well, how is that? He's like, well, I got over $1 million and I can live on $40,000 a year with my lifestyle right now. I'm like, okay, cool. That's the 4% rule, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, did you know that at your age, it's a 2% rule? What? It's 2%. That 4% rule only works if you're in your 60s. And by the way, that number shrinks as you get younger and it goes up if you're older. By the way, you can do a 4% rule if you're about 70 years old. That does work if you're 70. But if you're in your 60s, 3%. But if you're younger, like your age, it's more like 2%, maybe less. He's saying, wait, so you're saying I have to save now double to get this, to become financially independent? I said, yes. But here's the crazy thing. He's like, no, I don't believe it. I'm like, okay, you don't have to believe it, but just so you know, I was dealing with this, I was actually questioning this 4% rule when you were in first grade. When you were like eating glue and sniffing it and stuff, I was actually doing this. I was actually living it. But, it's your life, you figure it out. Still, $1 million as a 30-year-old is pretty freaking awesome, all right? So you shouldn't be discouraged by that fact. And that's the thing, guys, like so many people, just like the FIRE movement, they're like, oh, I don't want to hear this. Well, you don't have to hear it or not. You're going to find out the truth, right? That's the truth. Now, I will give you a little sneak peek, though. There's an answer, a way around it, because I was able to do it faster by not putting my money in those mutual funds, by not trying to live on 2% a year. I was able to do it faster because I realized this. Because if I had $1 million, right, and by the way, I did it with less than $1 million, but let's just use that same $1 million. If you're trying to do it when you're retired young, you're only living on $20,000 a year. That's not a lot. Really, it's not. So, but what if you could take that same million, but then invest it for ways that generate actual income? The reason it's only 2% is because we don't pull out a lot of money when the market goes down. That's called disinvesting, right? When you pull out money and then the market drops, then you have less money to pull out. Even if you pull out that same income you were trying to pull out before, it just keeps dropping. So if you were planning on $40,000 a year with that $1 million, well, what happens if that $1 million drops to 800,000? You still pull out your 40. Now you're down to 760, right? Well, now even if you made 20%, let's say that next year, okay, cool. You got it up to like now 900,000, but then you pull out 40 again, and you're at 860. But you're not at the million that you thought you'd be at when you just ran the perfect numbers, are you? And that's the thing. You get one bad down year, or a couple bad down years even, a couple in a row, which happens a lot. You have that happen, and boom, your cash is disappearing on you. So that 2% is what you do. But here's what I did instead. That same $1 million, this happened with a client of mine. He said, I don't want to live on 3%. He was in his 60s, early 60s. And I said, and that's what his financial advisor said. He's like, you can live on 30,000 a year. He's like, I don't want to. So he came to us. And we said, well, you can actually invest your money in different things in real estate. You can actually go put it over here. You can lend money over here. He bought some duplexes over here that were cash flowing with tax advantages too. He was doing things with apartments and whatnot, and even oil and gas. Diversified his money in different places. That $1 million was now producing over $100,000 a year. Not 20,000 or 30,000, over 100,000 a year. And that's not even touching the principal. That's just the interest, the income coming off of it. That's the big difference. And so those are the kind of things we talk about on this channel. So if you haven't subscribed on this, do that today. But if you want to see what you can actually do to create passive income now, maybe even get to the point where you could be financially independent faster than you thought you were on that track right now, go to our website, moneyripples.com. There's a passive income calculator. Fill that out. It'll give you a number that will show you how much passive income you could create in your situation in the next 12 months. Try that right now.